Botond Feledy, foreign policy expert. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
So everyone is saying that Hungary will be somewhat detrimental to what the EU wants to achieve. But I mean, is that the case really? Because after the dust settles, I mean, new European commissioners will be appointed. It will almost be over, right? Because they will be presiding over the Council of the EU for half a year only.
Definitely, that is, legislatively speaking, not the most active period. So it means that the new dossiers are not going to be opened this fall. Mainly, it's about finishing the earlier dossier, and that is what the Hungarian diplomats at the permanent representation promised. So I guess it is quite important that in Brussels we understand that there is a double language, one narrative carried by the Prime Minister Viktor Orban that is much more aggressive in its stance, while the language of the Hungarian diplomats in town is much more similar to the EU speak that we hear often from any other diplomat in town. So it is still carrying the risks that at the European summits, Viktor Orban might continue his usual attitude and stance on blocking or trying to avoid making important decisions, especially in security affairs. But my expectation is that in the everyday management of the legal dossier that have already been opened beforehand, it might just continue on the technical level without much interruption.
Okay, well, that's fine. I mean, but you know, we can't get away from the fact that Viktor Orban has constantly stood in the way of European Union decisions, and it seems to be quite popular with his home audience. I mean, he's been elected for the 5th term in 2022. What is it that Hungarians like about Viktor Orban?
That is a very difficult question, but I can tell you that at the last European Parliament elections, actually, he has met with the most composed and best coordinated opposition effort. So one single party carried 7 other MEPs to the European Parliament against the 11 MEPs of Fidesz, so the government party, and this is a great success of the opposition. So relatively, Fidesz won the last European elections, but this is the weakest relative victory of Viktor Orban in Hungary in any election in the last 14 years. So practically, he can feel somewhat weakened on the home ground. The public media is also taking care, together with the government-friendly media groups, to keep a very narrow channel of information about the war and the developments in Ukraine to the voter base. So there is disinformation happening in Hungary. Hungary was among the very few countries that did not condemn the Russian prohibition of certain channels, also including one in the country. So it's also a 14-year-long communication channel that has never been interrupted. That makes the voter base of Fidesz extremely strong.
Right, so we agreed on what Hungary won't be able to do, but perhaps we could take a look at what it will be able to do, what kind of agenda it could try and set for the EU. And I also wanted to ask you about funds for Hungary, that 11 billion euros, which is still withheld, right?
Yes. So to answer the first half of your question, the most important positive contribution might be the so-called Budapest Declaration that the ambassador at the permanent representation announced a few days ago, which is about the competitiveness. So that is about the industrial policy of the EU. Let's see how the actors and the shareholders are taking this up and whether the process leading to this declaration is feasible in the fall. On the other hand, what we expect is also what was mentioned by the colleague Jakub Janda, that on China and Russia, certainly the Hungarian presidency will not rush decisions. It will not oppose or hinder it explicitly, but as an honest broker of the presidency, but they will not rush it. As for the funds, we have to see whether Ursula von der Leyen is going to get re-elected. In this case, I do not expect any quick turn in this process, which means that the reconstruction funds of Hungary are still entirely blocked by 27 so-called super milestones that are not fulfilled by Hungary at this point, and there is not any visible political consideration to fulfill those super milestones. To make matters worse, there is the 2-year deadline that will be met in December, in mid-December. So in principle, legally speaking, Hungary might lose that huge amount of money coming from the reconstruction funds. And then there is the rest of the different other EU subventions and grants that are still in limbo, depending on the rule of law procedure. So indeed, it depends on the new political attitude of the European Commission and even more on the composition of the European Council and how much they will allow Hungary to step forward with its argumentation, whether to release the funds or not, but not much political movement is visible in Brussels around that topic.
Right, thanks for that. I want to go back to something that I'm having a hard time getting my head around, Mr. Feledy, and that is Hungary's attitude towards, well, supporting Russia indirectly. They were against the sending of funds from Russian assets to support Ukraine. They're not going to put any people or resources into supporting Ukraine and so on. What is it? I mean, Hungary suffered enormously under Soviet rule. Do they not see Putin's threat to Europe, including Hungary?
That would require me to give you a very long answer to explain the two levels of the narratives and reality. But to give you an example, there is a huge debate in Hungarian domestic politics about the role of the foreign minister and how much the Hungarian foreign ministry have been supportive of Russian intrusions even into its own structure, including a huge hacking scandal where actually it seems that the firewalls were not really restored after the scandal that happened in 2015. So for years, certain systems, information systems of the Hungarian foreign ministry might have remained breached and open to Russian hackers for more years. That means we are questioning very much in the Hungarian debate, especially the opposition and the investigative media, how much intentional that is, and they attribute intention on that for the last years. That means that the infiltration, the potential infiltration of the Hungarian public decision-making system is a normal security risk that the country is running. Just we really don't see official results in any investigations. We don't see Russian spies being sent back to Russia from Hungary. We don't hear from the Secret Service reports because the reports are not anymore public and they have been abolished in early Fidesz years in the government. So it's very difficult to get any public information on the real situation on the ground. What are the official government arguments for these decisions? The contract for the nuclear enlargement of the plant in Paks in the major part is secret. So it's just really a difficult work. We can have hypotheses, of course, whether it is infiltration, whether it is cooptation, whether it is a strategic corruption case, or just the pure sovereign decision of the prime minister. Probably all these variables have to be taken into account.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you about the opposition in Hungary. Peter Magyar and his party, they managed to get into the European Parliament. So how could that influence what Orban does next?
What we see is most probably the Orban system and the propaganda and the narrative factories around the government will get even stronger. That means we have seen the so-called the Office for the Defense of the Sovereignty, which is in charge of disinformation, attacking an independent online investigative journalist platform and Transparency International this week. So that is one of the expectations, that actually the regime might get even harder. And it is very difficult type of competition to Orban in person, because Péter Magyar is also having a background from Fidesz, just recently making the decision to quit the government current, and he is also having a character of the one who loves football, the one who is communicating talently on social media. So it will be difficult for the government to find the similar narratives against him as they were using against the communists or the former socialist partymen in the opposition. So it will be a new type of challenge, but of course the resources and the narratives being put out in the communication space are enormous.
All right. Well, thank you for laying that out for us, Mr. Feledy. We look forward to seeing how the presidency turns out. Have a good evening, sir.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Appreciate it.